Alex, I've spent the better part of 40 years trying to convince wood that it's still a tree, and the most dangerous 10 minutes of any build is the moment I pick up a brush.
Is that why you're staring at that bowl like it's a ticking time bomb? It's just finished, Tiger. You've done the hard part. The joints are tight, the sanding is smooth. Just put the shiny stuff on and call it a day.
Just put the shiny stuff on. That's like telling a chef to just put the heat on the souffle. Everything I've done for the last 3 weeks, the layout, the tedious hand planing, the 3 in the morning realizations that I cut a tenon backward, all of it can be erased by one poorly chosen gallon of goo.
I think you're being dramatic, but since the listeners are probably staring at their own gallons of goo right now, let's settle the great debate. Polyurethane, oil, or lacquer? If you had to pick a hill to die on today, which one is it?
Well, it depends on whether I want to live with the piece or just look at it from a safe distance. Most folks grab a can of polyurethane because they think it's the body armor of the wood world, and they aren't wrong.
Poly is the default, right? It's what my dad used on the deck. It's what's on my kitchen floor. It feels like the safe choice.
It's the tank of finishes. Polyurethane is basically liquid plastic. Once it cures, it creates this durable film that'll protect a coffee table from a spilled glass of red wine or a toddler with a rogue crayon. But, and there's always a catch, it can look a bit encased, like you've shrink-wrapped your project.
Like grandmother's plastic-covered sofa?
Exactly, you lose that tactile wood feel. And here's a memory I'd like to delete. I once did a beautiful walnut desk for a client, used a high-gloss poly, and didn't realize I had a tiny bit of dust in the air. I walked back in the next morning and it looked like a topographical map of the Andes. Every single speck of dust was frozen in that plastic forever.
So, if poly is the armor, what's the natural look? I keep seeing tung oil and linseed oil on all those fancy maker Instagrams.
That's the soul-satisfying stuff right there. Oils, your tung oils, your boiled linseed oils, they don't sit on top of the wood. They climb inside the grain and make themselves at home. It's what we call a penetrating finish.
Okay, I'm sold. It looks better. It feels like wood. Why would I ever use anything else?
Because easy to apply comes with a pay later clause. An oil finish has almost zero protection against heat or standing water. You put a hot mug of coffee on a linseed oil table, and you're going to have a permanent white ring that looks like a ghost coaster. Plus, the wait times. I used pure tung oil on a rocking chair once, not the tung oil finish stuff you buy at the big box store, but the real raw deal. I think I grew a full beard waiting for those 5 coats to cure. It takes weeks to fully harden.
So poly is the indestructible plastic shell, and oil is the beautiful, high-maintenance supermodel. Where does lacquer fit in? That's what the pros use, right?
Lacquer is the speed demon. If you go into a high-end furniture factory, they aren't waiting for poly to dry for 8 hours. They're spraying lacquer because it dries so fast that dust doesn't even have time to land on it.
Wait, so it's fast and it looks professional? Why aren't we all using that then?
Because it's high stakes. Most lacquers, the good ones, really need to be sprayed. And the fumes, let's just say if you try to spray lacquer in a basement without a serious respirator and a death wish for your furnace pilot light, you're in trouble. It's incredibly flammable. But the beauty of lacquer is that it melts into itself.
Melts into itself? That sounds like a marketing phrase. Explain that in human terms.
Okay, so if you put a second coat of poly over a first coat, they just sit on top of each other like 2 sheets of glass. If you don't sand between them, they won't even stick. But lacquer, the solvent in the second coat actually dissolves the top of the first coat. They fuse into one single thick layer. It's like they have a molecular secret handshake.
That's actually really cool. But what about the person who isn't a pro with a spray booth? What if I'm just trying to fix a scratched up chest of drawers I found at a garage sale?
That's the detective work part of the job. Before you choose a finish, you have to know what's already there.
Right, because putting poly over an old wax finish is like trying to paint over a buttered noodle.
That's a vivid image, Alex. But you're spot on. I've seen finishes peel off in sheets because someone didn't do the solvent test. It's simple. You take a little denatured alcohol on a cotton swab and find a hidden spot. If the finish gets soft and sticky, it's shellac.
Shellac. That's the one made from bugs, right?
Lac bugs, yeah, it was the gold standard before 1920. If alcohol doesn't move it, you try lacquer thinner. If that melts it, you got lacquer. If neither of those works, you're looking at a reactive finish, either a varnish or a poly. And if it's poly, you can't just refresh it. You've got to sand the living daylights out of it to get anything to stick.
This is starting to sound like a lot of chemistry and a lot of potential for me to ruin my weekend. Let's talk about the mistakes. Give me one of those Tiger-specific moments where it all went sideways.
Oh, I have a library of those. About 10 years ago, I was finishing a dining table made of African mahogany. It was a beast, 8 feet long. I decided to use a Danish oil, which is actually just a mix of oil and varnish.
Sounds like the best of both worlds.
In theory, but I got impatient. I applied the second coat. Before the first one had fully flashed off, I thought, hey, I'll just flood it on, it'll soak in. Well, the wood was already full. The excess oil sat on the surface and reacted with the oxygen in the room. By the next morning, that table wasn't smooth. It was covered in these little sticky, rubbery beads that felt like dried honey.
Oh no, what did you do?
I spent 3 days with a scraper and a gallon of mineral spirits, literally weeping as I peeled off this gummy mess. I had to go all the way back to bare wood. I learned the hard way that with finishing, slow is fast. If the instructions say wait 6 hours, I wait 12. If the can says wipe off the excess, I wipe it like I'm trying to polish a mirror.
Okay, so patience is a virtue is the first pro tip. What's the second? Say I want the protection of poly, but I hate that plastic look you mentioned. Is there a middle ground?
There is, and it's the secret weapon of the lazy craftsman, wiping poly.
You're just watering it down.
I'm making it manageable. When you thin polyurethane by about 50% with mineral spirits, it becomes a wipe-on finish. You lose that thick, gloopy look. You just wipe a thin layer on with a rag, let it dry, and repeat. You might need 6 coats instead of 2, but those 6 coats will be flawlessly smooth, and they'll follow the texture of the wood grain instead of burying it. No brush marks, no bubbles, no drama.
That sounds way less intimidating. But what about the green factor? Some of these things smell like they're stripping the lining out of my lungs.
That's been the big shift lately. Water-based finishes have come a long way. 20 years ago, water-based poly looked like blue milk and dried with the clarity of a foggy window. Today, they're incredible. They stay clear. They don't yellow over time like the oil-based stuff.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I thought woodworkers liked that amber glow.
It depends on the wood. If you're finishing white maple or holly, you want that water white look. You don't want it to eventually look like a nicotine-stained ceiling. But on walnut, water-based can look a bit cold. It lacks the depth.
So choosing a finish is actually an aesthetic choice as much as a protective one.
Exactly. You're choosing the filter for your wood.
Okay, Tiger, let's wrap this up for the person standing in the hardware store right now, staring at the aisle of 1,000 cans. Let's do a quick choice guide.
All right, hit me.
A kitchen table for a family with 3 kids.
Polyurethane. Either a high-quality brush-on or, if you have the time, 6 to 8 coats of wipe-on. It's the only thing that'll survive the spaghetti sauce.
A decorative jewelry box made of exotic wood.
Danish oil or a simple wax. You want people to feel the wood when they pick it up. Protect it from dust, but keep the touch.
A set of outdoor Adirondack chairs.
A dedicated spar urethane. It's like regular poly, but with extra additives to block UV rays and more flexibility. Outdoor wood moves like a living thing. If the finish is too brittle, it'll just crack and flake off in a month.
And finally, an old heirloom rocking chair that's lost its shine but isn't quite ruined.
Don't sand it. Clean it with a bit of mineral spirits, figure out if it's lacquer or shellac, and then use the reflowing trick. Dampen a cloth with the right solvent and gently rub the surface. You'll melt the old finish just enough to fill in the scratches and bring back the luster. It's like giving the chair a time machine treatment.
I think I can handle that, though I'll probably still call you the second I see a bubble.
Just remember, the finish isn't the end of the project, it's the beginning of its life. Treat it with a bit of respect, don't rush the dry times, and for heaven's sake, keep the cat out of the shop until the tackiness is gone. I once had a ginger tabby leave a trail of paw prints across a mahogany headboard that took me a week to fix.
That's the tuition you pay, right?
No, that's just the tax for being a cat owner in a woodworking shop.
Fair enough.
The big takeaway today? Don't be afraid of the finish. It's not a barrier between you and the wood, it's the conversation between the two. Listen to what the wood needs. Is it for work or is it for beauty? Once you answer that, the can practically chooses itself.
And if all else fails, just thin it down and wipe it on.
You're learning, Alex. You're learning.
Thanks for hanging out in the Tiger Den. Go make something beautiful and let it dry before you touch it.
Seriously, hands off.